All right, everyone. I think we can get started. I have 12 noon on the dot. I've introduced myself. I'm John Morris, and I have the honor of being the director of the Knight Alzheimer Disease Research Center at Washington University. And one of our premier events is the Norman R. Seay Lecture. And this year we're having the 15th annual Seay Lecture. It will be presented by Dr. Raina Croff. Just as a quick note, many of you are aware that the Knight ADRC has been very importantly guided in trying to become more welcoming to people of color by our African American Advisory Board. And Mr. Norman Seay was the inaugural chair of that advisory board beginning in the year 2000. When he stepped down as chair in 2006, I decided that we should have this annual lecture in his name. And so we're very pleased to be able, as I said, to continue this through the now the 15th annual Seay Lecture. We are also extremely honored today to welcome the Chancellor of Washington University, Andrew D. Martin, to provide some welcoming remarks. Dr. Martin graduated from the College of William and Mary and then received his doctoral degree in political science from Washington University. In 1998, he held a number of leadership roles here at Washington University, including as the founding director of the Center for Empirical Research in the law, as well as the chair of Department of Political Science in Arts and Sciences. 2014, he was attracted to the University of Michigan, where he served as the dean. And until a few years later, we were able to bring him back, thankfully, to Washington University to succeed Mark Wrighton as Chancellor of the university, and Dr. Martin became Chancellor in 2019. So Chancellor, thank you so much, and we look forward to your welcoming remarks.
Well, thank you, Dr. Morris, for your welcome and for your introduction. Greetings, and thank you for being with us today for the 15th annual Norman R. Seay Lecture, a time to honor Norman R. Seay, the civil rights leader, educator, and dedicated volunteer and supporter of Alzheimer's research. We're delighted to have Raina Croff serve as our keynote today. Welcome, Dr. Croff. I look forward to hearing from you in just a few minutes. Before we move forward with our program, I want to say a little bit about Norman R. Seay's life of leadership and service as we continue to carry his legacy forward through this event and through our research, education, and patient care mission here at Washington University. Norman R. Seay, a native of St. Louis, became a founding member of the St. Louis chapter of the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, in 1947 while attending Vashon High School. This experience laid the foundation for a lifetime of work in political activism. He received a BA in elementary education from Stowe Teachers College, now Harris Stowe State University, and a graduate degree in secondary education from Lincoln University in Jefferson City, Missouri. He then taught grade school, but remained active in the civil rights movement, culminating in the nonviolent picketing of the Jefferson Bank in 1963, when it stated it would not hire Black people because, according to the bank, none were qualified. After 7 months of picketing, the bank relented and began to hire Black people. Mr. Seay was arrested for his involvement in the demonstration and spent 3 months in jail, where he promptly started a school for illiterate inmates. His civil rights activities ultimately cost him his job in St. Louis. So in 1974, Mr. Seay moved to Washington, D.C., where he worked for the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare in the areas of integration and education. During this time, he also worked with the committee that resulted in the nationally observed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. In 1984, Mr. Seay returned to St. Louis to care for his mother, who had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. She was a patient of Dr. Morris, leading to warm interactions that made Mr. Seay aware of the Knight Alzheimer Disease Research Center. He accepted a position as a coordinator of minority affairs at the University of Missouri St. Louis and then was promoted to the university's director of the Office of Equal Opportunity, where he remained for over 15 years. Mr. Seay became the inaugural chair of the Knight ADRC's African American Advisory Board in 2000, as Dr. Morris sought guidance as how to make the ADRC more welcoming to people of color. After sustaining an illness in 2006, Mr. Seay relinquished the chairmanship of the AAAB, but remained an active member until his death on September 17, 2019, at the age of 87 years. Dr. Morris established the Norman R. Seay Lecture in 2006 in recognition of Mr. Say's great contributions to the AAAB and to the Knight ADRC. I am extremely proud and honored that we've been able to carry this tradition and Mr. Say's legacy forward for 15 years now through this lecture and our work. Honoring his legacy, this event provides an important opportunity for us to learn more and think critically about the health disparities that continue to plague our nation and world, in this case as it relates to Alzheimer's and minorities. Here at Washington University, we are firmly committed to utilizing our research, education, and patient care mission to uncover health disparities and work to address them and close the all too pervasive gap. By doing so, this work not only benefits those who were directly affected, but it benefits all of us as it strengthens our communities and our well-being as a whole. At WashU, we see this as one of our greatest responsibilities as we strive to uplift the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion and improve all lives in service of the greater good. Thank you again for being with us, and now I'll hand it back over to Dr. Morris, who will introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much, Chancellor. That was terrific. And we look forward also to a terrific lecture from Raina Croff. We met Raina a couple of years ago when she attended the workshop that was hosted by the Knight ADRC here at Washington University School of Medicine on African American participation in Alzheimer research, and we're delighted to have her serve as the 15th annual Seay lecturer. Dr. Croff graduated from Beloit College in 1999 with majors in both classical civilizations and anthropology, and received her doctoral degree in anthropology from Yale University in 2009. She then relocated to Oregon Health Sciences University in Portland, Oregon, where she initially began examining medication research to enable people to treat opioid and alcohol dependency, but by 2015 had moved to the Alzheimer's Disease Research Center there at Oregon Health Sciences University, led by Professor Jeff Kay. And from that time on, she has used her training as an anthropologist to design brain health interventions that celebrate Black culture, history, and community memory. So we're very much grateful to Dr. Croft for taking the time to serve as our Seay lecturer, and look forward to her presentation today on Black joy matters in aging research. Raina, we wish you were here in person, not only because we enjoy interacting with you, but we also have a plaque that says that you are the Seay lecturer, and we won't be able to give it to you, but we will send it to you. So again, thanks so much, and welcome to the Seay lecture.
Thank you so much, and thanks for that plaque. That is a surprise. Thank you. I really appreciate that. So I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. All right. Well, I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I'm honored to be the Norman R. Seay lecturer this year. And I too want to just acknowledge and take a moment of gratitude for Norman Say's courage and his dedication to civil rights. I also want to acknowledge that it has been a really difficult year on so many levels. And so I hope that this talk today, with its bright colors and images of joyful Black people, is a bright spot, and that it helps spark ideas for how our centers can inspire more joy in our research as well. So the goal of this talk is to understand Black joy a little bit better, how it shows up in aging research, and to spotlight our charge as researchers to co-author, along with our participants, asset-based narratives to support joy in research. So we'll be looking at what is joy and what is this concept of Black joy. We'll examine just a few frameworks for supporting Black joy. We'll look at examples of joy in research, looking at a variety of mindfulness and arts-based interventions. And we'll dive into the culturally celebratory SHARP study that I run. And finally, I'll leave you with some questions about how our centers can cultivate joy in aging research. So what is joy and what is Black joy? Laura Cottrell wanted to examine the concepts of joy and happiness to change the nursing narrative, and as she puts it, to promote exploration of positive concepts to provide possibilities to reframe and rebalance the nursing discourse in a more positive way and shape a view of the nursing world where focusing on strengths rather than deficits becomes possible. So Cottrell looked at 61 articles in a book, all published between 1978 and 2014. And she mined the databases of anthropology, religion, nursing, education, humanities, and psychology. And what she found is that there are some principal differences between happiness and joy. So happiness is a cultivated state of being. It's like a low intensity inner current of satisfaction. And it's really an I-me construct because it's about your personal inner state of being. Whereas joy is involuntary, it's spontaneous. You don't have to be happy to experience joy. Joy bursts through in moments of human connection, in moments of sudden awareness and freedom, and it is an us-we construct. So this idea that joy is an us-we construct is really a huge part of why it's called Black joy and not just joy. So the Black joy, the Black in Black joy recalls that I, as a Black person, am part of a Black collective, that my joy is about my experience, but it's also about our experience, that the difficulties and the stress and the trauma that I experience because of systemic racism and lifelong messaging about Black people are the same struggles that all Black people in this country face. And Black joy as this collective experience is a culturally familiar way to talk about joy because the us-we construct has been at the root of our survival forever. And in a nation where independence is among the highest values, interdependence has been among Black Americans' highest values. And in a hostile environment, which the US has been for most of its history for Black people, standing out alone and being independent was dangerous. It meant higher likelihood of being brutally attacked, stolen, raped, sold, profiled, murdered, incarcerated, you name it. So this us-we worldview translates into strong interdependent communities. Community has meant protection and survival, and community means belonging. So the Oakland Joy Parade, it's now in its third year, and the founder, Alicia Greenwell, she says this: for me, Black joy means belonging, to feel like you're not the only one, to feel like people get it, how you felt growing up and what you're going through and how you identify yourself. And no one is the same, but just to be around people who you don't feel like you have to explain it. You know it when you feel it. So just as Black joy is belonging, trauma then is the result of not belonging in dominant society and therefore not having access to the same justice, not having access to the same wealth, which of course has implications for our health. And Black joy then is inextricably linked to Black trauma. Alicia Greenwell also says this: years and years of trauma and displacement and not feeling like you belong can really wear on a person's soul. And then to ask them to go out and to protest all the time and to keep fighting it, that's tiring. So Black joy as a concept is really publicly understood mostly through social and popular media. It's really the space in which this discourse is rapidly evolving. And so in the blog, Our Voices, they featured an article called Black Joy is Resistance, in which they ask the question, what does a life of healing, flourishing, and joy even look like for communities that are constantly riddled with deep traumatic pain. And in the article, What Black Joy Means and Why It's More Important Than Ever, they explain joy as resistance in this way. We can actively trace the spatial and temporal control of Black expression from slavery and colonialism through to today. This is why the act of joy is resistance. And as we use our physical bodies to protest, march, and demand change, we must also use them to experience the pleasure of joy. So we see Black joy as an expression of belonging, and also as a physical expression of the freedom we have over our own bodies. So it's both a belonging in a group and a belonging to ourselves. And this empowers the idea then that we can extend that freedom to control our own bodies, to control the environment in which our bodies, in which we live and work and play, to then influence or exert some control over policies that shape our health. And in this way, Black joy is also intricately linked to change movements like Black Lives Matter. So Black joy is many things, and we're really only touching the surface here. Not only is it belonging and resistance, but it's also a call and response. Black joy is something that's meant to be shared and responded to because it's not just an I experience, but simultaneously it's an I and a we experience. In my divings of, in my searching of this discourse about Black joy online, I've also found that Black joy is to be protected for our own mental health in the face of recurring tragedies. Black joy is spoken of as being, it needs to be defended, that it's up for debate. People express online how they have been questioned about why are they so joyful in these moments of tragedy? How can they even think about experiencing joy, or this need to qualify their joy and to explain themselves? And I've also seen that Black joy is largely associated with youth. And of course, this is related to the fact that this discourse is evolving online through applications that are largely the tool of our younger populations. And so I've seen that images of older adults and their presence in the discourse of what Black joy is largely missing from this discourse online as it's unfolding publicly on social media. So another thing that I think is critically important is that Black joy is also a choice, even if you are not Black. So it's a choice. White people, non-Black people can choose to perpetuate narratives of tragedy in the Black community or narratives of joy, resilience, success, and strengths. The narratives we choose to amplify and perpetuate shape how Black people are perceived. They shape how Black people perceive themselves and how they perceive their agency for healthy change. So yes, Black joy is all of this, and we're going to focus on Black joy as belonging and as a choice. So what does this mean for aging research? Well, given the history of medical research in Black people in this country, a sense of belonging in research is not innate. Medical research was not to serve us originally, but to extract from us. Historically, it has been our bodies that have been the center of our value from an outside perspective. Our bodies were valued for labor, for reproduction, for experimentation, for others' pleasure in slavery and in medicine alike. And we were not valued for our individual intellect or our culture. So it means we have to work very hard at intentionally cultivating a sense of belonging in research for Black older adults. And part of cultivating a sense of belonging in research is developing a new narrative of Black people and research. So within the field of brain health, I think we can too easily slip into echoes of that historical narrative that centers the Black body and its parts instead of centering the person and the community within which they are interdependently connected. And so for researchers, this might look like framing brain health in terms of cognitive function instead of how it affects people's relationships, or focusing too narrowly on the memory loss instead of the effect on the quality of life and well-being and how it affects one's interactions within community. We can also too easily slip into a deficit-based narrative of our increased risk for Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline compared to white people, which has an unintended subtext that our increased risk is somehow a fault innate to Black people. And so when we stop and start the narrative there, with that familiar refrain that even I have started my papers and posters with, that refrain that we all know, that African Americans are twice as likely to develop cognitive decline and Alzheimer's disease because of disproportionate rates of obesity and chronic conditions like hypertension and et cetera, et cetera. And then if we stop there without any acknowledgement of the larger inequities, we are then putting the onus on Black people for the disparity instead of on the historical and present inequities that shaped disparities in the first place, and that even shaped aspects of our cultural behaviors that perpetuate health disparities. So yes, we do have to talk about the physical brain. That's part of what we do as brain health researchers. But we must not put the onus on our participants to then translate brain health into meaningful concepts that they care about. That translation is really our job. And so on the left of the screen, I've put down some ideas of what a researcher can do to cultivate a sense of belonging in Black aging research, so that that sets a better foundation for more joyful experience in research. And then I want to just revisit that first aim that I put up of Laura Cottrell, who was examining joy, and I replaced nursing, the word nursing, with phrases that are of meaning to this group. And so we can do these things on the left in order to promote exploration of positive concepts, to provide possibilities, to reframe and rebalance the discourse about Black people, brain health, and Alzheimer's disease in a more positive way, and shape a view of Black people, brain health, and Alzheimer's disease where focusing on strengths rather than deficits becomes possible. So I'd like to look now at just really briefly a few frameworks that support joy. And these are frameworks that support joy because they center the us-we worldview, which is essential for establishing belonging. They forward asset-based narratives. And so together, these characteristics help better support joy in aging research. And so you may all be familiar with this South African Hosa spiritual philosophy that is basically holism. And there's no other philosophy, I think, that better encompasses that us-we concept. And it is the worldview that there's interdependence between the whole person and the environment. And it can essentially be translated as I am because we are. It's the idea that you cannot be human alone. And this idea is also at the base, and it runs through the Black Lives Matter principles. And so Kasten Anderson Carpenter in their 2020 paper takes a look at Black Lives Matter principles as an Afrocentric approach to improving Black American health. And they look at the quality or the principle of honoring diversity, how Black Lives Matter acknowledges, embraces, and celebrates intersecting Black identities. So trans and queer and non-binary, older Black adults, women, people of different physical abilities. Also looking at the inclusion of these marginalized groups and looking at Black people as citizen scientists in participatory research and action, so that they are not just participants, but they are truly participants, and helping us understand Black health through a Black-centered lens from all of the diversity within our population. The author also looks at community-oriented interventions that include Black community members as integral partners in development, implementation, evaluation, and sustainment. So this is truly cultivating that sense of belonging in research, not just as research as this sort of whole entity, but its individual parts, because of the sense of belonging at each phase of the research is cultivated. And the author also looks at group dynamics, positive psychological and behavioral change by promoting Black families and villages. Again, going back to that us-we worldview, that construct that it has been at the root of our survival and interaction in this country. And the piece that really speaks to me is the author says that public health interventions, we can also say brain health interventions, for Black Americans should use multidimensional approaches that include storytelling and oral histories, as well as harmonious integration of emotional, cognitive, and behavioral aspects of the whole person. So this is a table from Green, Harris, and colleagues on the paper Addressing Disparities in Alzheimer's Disease and African American Participation in Research. And this group, the Wisconsin Alzheimer's Institute in Milwaukee, they were practicing an asset-based community development approach to increase participation of African Americans in research, to increase their African American cohort. And so you're looking at panel A are the core aspects of ABCD approach, asset-based approach, examples of activities, and then the outcomes. And so, of course, they began with identifying the community and their assets. They asked the community what their wants and needs were instead of coming in with a pre-decided agenda. And they really worked at integrating themselves into the social fabric of the community. Of course, investing time in the community, providing resources identified by the community, and recognizing community members as experts, validating community members' perspectives. And so I just want to highlight here the green to really emphasize the balance, or not the balance, to emphasize the ratio between the give, the investment in the community. And then this pink here, this small portion is really the take. And of course, I'm going to emphasize this point by these big words. So this is really the give. This is the investment, and the take is really quite small. And the take was, I mean, it is not small, but proportionately into what the researchers invested. So the take is asking community members to be involved as part of the community advisory board and to counsel researchers, and also to then be engaged in research as participants, or to increase African American participation. And so I'm not saying that the ask or that being in a community advisory board is small at all, but I'm just showing you the ratio between all of the work and investment that goes into community building. And this to me looks like a healthy researcher and community relationship. And in fact, it paid off. And from 2008 to 2012, their African American participation increased more than 400%. So I want to also take a look at just a bunch of examples of joy in research. So these studies cultivate a sense of belonging, which we know is essential or a foundational principle of fostering joy. They cultivate the sense of belonging because they are culturally specific. They spark joy in various forms, and because they honor that us-we construct. And so I'm going to just give a rapid overview of joy in a very broad sense, and of the brain health related benefits that these studies have shown. And so this is a study that I and my colleagues did where we examined Afrocentric mindfulness-based stress reduction among older Black women. We had 10 women in the study. And so I want to demonstrate that not all joy is a jumping for joy kind of feeling. It can be a very centered and peaceful feeling. And so when we discussed with our participants what they thought of these Afrocentric classes, the common theme was that it helped them to return to their core self, to remember their strength in faith and family. And as one woman said, helped her to think about, what am I going to do differently so that I can relieve the stress, so that I'm healthier, regardless of the adversarial things that come in our path. And so this is the idea of Black joy, to help protect a mentally healthy space inside of us, despite all of the recurring trauma on the outside. So this study, published in 2017, aimed to interrupt reactive patterns associated with stress by adapting a Central African healing ceremony called Ngoma. And I just love this. Ngoma means strength of the panther, and Ma means to give. And so this study, they were working very closely with 2 women from the Republic of Congo who helped administer this mindfulness-based stress reduction approach. And they did this with 25 to 60-year-olds, about half of whom were Black. This was over 8 weeks, these 2.5-hour sessions, and it involved mindful walking, gentle yoga, relaxation, and then they had group dialogue. And they examined depression and anxiety. They examined self-perceived health and group cohesion. And the results were that there was a robust decrease in depression and anxiety, a group cohesion increased, self-reported health improvements across all scales, and social well-being and social functioning were most notable changes. This study, another study that I just love, is the REACT study, and this is the Rhythm, Experience, and Africana Culture Trial. And so this group, coming out of University of Pennsylvania and University of Pittsburgh, they looked at African dance for weight loss, and they're also looking at it for cognitive function, and I think those outcomes are forthcoming. And they did this, of course, with older Black Americans. And so they randomized 28 African Americans into a treatment group. The treatment group being African dance 3 times a week for 6 months, or the control group, which was educational training on Africana history and culture and information about health behaviors 3 times a week for 6 months. The average age was 68 years old, and they found significant change in weight in the dance group. And so we know that obesity is related to cardiovascular disease and obesity and hypertension and heart trouble. Those are all risks for cognitive decline. And so addressing something like obesity in our communities through a joyful expression of dance that also grounds us in our sense of belonging and pride for culture is a beautiful way to reduce risk for cognitive decline. And so this study looked at theater for health awareness. And this was done with one of my colleagues that I worked with before, Daniela Friedman and her colleagues. And they looked at increasing awareness about colorectal cancer screening among disproportionately high-risk African-American communities through culturally appropriate arts-based cancer education. And this was done in African-American churches in South Carolina. And this involved the church pastor and the health and wellness ministry and the drama ministry. And they created a play. They had 110 attendees, and they looked at pre-play or pre-intervention knowledge about colorectal cancer and screening. And they found that from pre to post, the test knowledge increased about colorectal cancer screening and about intentions for screening. This was statistically significant change. And pre-test, 78% of the attendees believed that colorectal cancer was preventable, but after they watched the play, they understood that 94% understood that it was preventable. 81% of these attendees said that they would now talk about CRC or colorectal cancer to others, and 78% said that they would talk to a health provider. And after watching the play, 60% said that they would be screened, and for those that had already been screening, 81% said that they would continue screening. So we know from other studies that theater is engaging and it's effective, particularly among African-American men who found theater to be effective in increasing prostate cancer knowledge, likelihood to engage in healthier behavior and prostate screening. It has also been shown in HIV and AIDS and breast cancer. And I'm sure it has been and could be aptly applied to communicating brain health in a way that brings community together, is enjoyable, and also informative. And so similarly, this study out of Chicago by Rajan and colleagues looked at live performance and cognitive health. And they wanted to examine if attendance in live performance was associated with change in cognition. And so they examined some neighborhoods in Southside Chicago, and they looked at live performance attendance, watching music and theater in over 5,000 participants, and the majority of whom were African Americans. And so the average age was 72 years old, and they asked, in the past 10 years, how many times have you attended a concert, a play, or musical? And they did follow-up interviews. And so for African Americans, as well as for the other groups, the result was that frequent theater attendance was associated with slower decline in composite cognitive function. And 10 or more performances a year was associated with a 23% slower cognitive decline versus those who never attended any live performances. And they also saw a slower decline in individuals' tests of perceptual speed, episodic memory, and in their mini mental state examination assessments. And you can see the difference in this chart here on the left between African Americans who did not attend and the cognitive function over time of those who had frequent attendance was a slower decline. I mean, who doesn't love to, and who doesn't enjoy watching live performances, music, and theater? This study looked at singing for health and well-being, and this group explored perceived benefits of choral singing among older adults. And this was, again, primarily among African Americans. This took place in day centers, at these adult day centers, and the results were that choir rehearsals and performances provided opportunities for social engagement. People had a great time together. Participants perceived the benefits to be feeling good, getting a lift, a release of tension, and a positive change in attitude. And some of the comments from participants were that it's uplifting. It's a joyful time together. I look forward to feeling good. I know that I'm going to feel good when I come here. We have a joyful time, and that is exactly what I like. Another person talks about laughing all the time. We've also seen in other studies that older adults who participated in community-based choirs reported fewer doctor visits, fewer falls, less medication use, and better physical health. I think many of us are probably familiar with that beautiful documentary, Alive Inside, that gave music or compiled personal playlists for individuals who were in residential care. And if you've seen it, you know, we all remember Henry, how he responded when he listened to this music. And he said, it gives me the feeling of love. Right now, the world needs to come into music. And so this study was in the same vein. This study looked at the effects of a person-centered music listening intervention on mood, agitation, and social engagement for individuals living with dementia. And this also took place in adult day health centers. And they had individualized playlists on iPods, and people listened to their individual headphones in a room with 7 to 10 other people. And they looked at mood and agitation pre the intervention, after the intervention, and 6 weeks after the intervention. And also conducted behavioral observations 2 times a week for 6 weeks. And so what they found during the intervention, they didn't necessarily find significant changes in mood and agitation, but they did find statistically significant increases in joy, eye contact, eye movement, being engaged, and talkativeness. And there was a decrease in moving and rocking and sleeping from before the intervention to after the intervention. And in terms of observations, they found statistically significant increases in smiling. People were more alert. People appeared more relaxed. And they recognized the music. They were singing. They were following the rhythm. They were, like the documentary says, they were really alive inside, and that allowed their expression to come to the outside. And so the results post-intervention, these results were sustained, or at least there were sustained positive changes in people engaging more socially. And there was a sustained increase in eye contact after the intervention was over, and eye movement and engagement and talkativeness, and a decrease in sleeping. This study looked at photography and caregiver burden. And so this study with Drs. Wharton and Epps and colleagues looked at 10 unpaid caregivers of persons living with dementia, and they participated in 4 sessions that were led by a professional photojournalist who taught them about photography and helped them use their devices. And they were asked to photograph what caregiving meant to them, and then they discussed it. And this study had clinical meaningful reductions in caregiver burden and depressive symptoms. The Joy of Food, this was one of my favorite studies to discover. And this study actually took place in South Africa and Norway, and we're going to be focusing on the South Africans. And this study looked at learning about the meaning of traditional food to institutionalized patients with dementia. And so nurses and patients' family members were interviewed about their experiences regarding their patients' food preferences and reactions to the dishes they were served. And Black South Africans in these institutions were mostly fed dominant culture, or they were fed white foods, foods that they did not grow up, that they were not familiar with, that they might not have enjoyed as much. And so the result in this study was that serving Black patients foods that they were used to from their youth was a means of reminiscence and joy. It had a calming effect. And the author proposes that serving these foods helped to maintain and strengthen cultural identity. They observed that it increased patients' feelings of, or they propose it increased patients' feelings of belonging, being respected and being cared for. It also improved patients' appetites, which is important for nutritional intake and quality of life. And so some of the nurses and family members were interviewed, and one of the quotes was, "The food, it helps to feel that they belong here. It has something to do with safety and something recognizable. If one has dementia and recognizes the dish, for instance, there is something safe and good about that experience." Familiar tastes and smells awoke pleasant memories in patients and boosted their sense of well-being, identity, and belonging, even producing words in those who usually did not speak. So again, this is the idea of establishing a sense of belonging, and then the joy that can come out of that sense of safety and belonging and connection to our culture and our identity as whole people. And finally, this study looked at the relationship between reminiscence and depression. And my work is around reminiscence, so I wanted to highlight this study. This was an 8-week life review reminiscence intervention with healthy older African-American men. They had consistently high attendance. They had a 95% retention rate, and they found significant decline in depression. So all of these studies are joyful ways to promote and exercise brain health. And I hope that they have inspired some brainstorming, some sparks of ideas of how us and our work can inspire more joy in our research, and that it's really a partnership between our participants and ourselves to understand what joy looks like for different communities, for different diversity within the community, and to really build this idea of more joyful research and more engaging, culturally specific, whole person centered brain health interventions. So now I want to dive into the SHARP study. This is the study that I direct. And this study, well, first of all, SHARP stands for Sharing History Through Active Reminiscence and Photo Imagery. And our tagline is Honoring Our Health and History. The aim of this program, of this study, is to maintain or improve older Black adults' brain health through celebrating culture and actively producing it. The active production of culture is the oral history digital archive that they are creating as they are conversationally reminiscing together, as they are walking through rapidly gentrifying historically Black neighborhoods and remembering their life experiences and interacting with each other about their life stories in these areas. And so the SHARP study, we started off, of course, with interviews and focus groups about the impact of gentrification on older Black adults' ability to age successfully in place, and the impact on what this might mean for brain health. And so what we found was participants were really lamenting the lack or the disappearing opportunistic social engagement as people were being displaced to outlying areas, as the demographics around them were becoming younger and whiter.
Hearing from progressives who lament that even if Biden wins, Trump and McConnell have tilted.
Okay. And participants were also lamenting that the new neighborhoods in which they were being displaced to were not as walkable as the old neighborhoods, and they were less motivated to walk in the neighborhoods that were being gentrified for those who stayed in the gentrifying areas, because the landmarks were being erased. They were no longer familiar, their neighbors were gone. And so they were also reminiscing what community had meant to be physically centrally located, where they could depend on their neighbors. And they really were thinking that they were going to have dependable neighbors that they had cultivated trust for years as they entered into their older years and were trying to age successfully in place. And so we want to know what would happen if we blended these three modalities that we know are good for brain health: social engagement, walking, and reminiscence. We did this within the historically Black neighborhoods of Portland, Oregon, which is my hometown. And this was a culturally celebratory approach where older Black adults could engage with each other about their life stories in a way that lifted up and honored their lived histories, that celebrates their strengths and accomplishments of the Black community, and particularly considering that these neighborhoods were just about the only places where Black families could live because of racist mortgage lending practices that is known as redlining. And so SHARP is a multimodal approach to brain health. It engages walking, social engagement, and reminiscence, which then addresses multiple modifiable risk factors for cognitive decline. This includes isolation, depression, and cardiovascular health. And so we had 21 individuals were split into 7 triads, and each triad was 2 cognitively healthy individuals with 1 person who was experiencing mild cognitive impairment or more memory loss than is normal for their age. And we did cognitive assessment at baseline and end study, and we had focus groups to understand the cultural significance and the experience, as well as to help us to improve the approach. And our hypothesis was that we knew that preserving history in the face of gentrification was a community priority. And so that giving them a means to do this while working on their brain health would be motivation to stay engaged for better cognitive health. And of course, the fact that they are also producing a cultural artifact, this digital oral history archive that can later be accessed by researchers, educators, by their family, that really speaks to what Black culture was and what it can continue to be, even if we are not together in a centrally located physical proximity, but more dispersed. And so triads aim to walk 3 times a week using the SHARP walking application, which you see on the top. And they access this on a group tablet that was pre-programmed with 1-mile routes and neighborhood-based historical images between 1940 and 2010, which was the time frame in which the Black community came to settle and thrive and then experienced decay because of systematic racist denial of home improvement loans and then gentrification and dispersal. And the conversational reminiscence was automatically recorded for that archive that I already mentioned. This is the tablet that they accessed it on. There was 1 per group, so that if someone wasn't comfortable with technology, they didn't have to be the one to be in charge of the tablet. And then we also had backup paper copy materials so that our technology failures would not impede their ability to get together and continue their dedication to one another and their chance for social engagement and physical activity and reminiscence. So we had a number of walking themes. This is an example of what a memory marker looks like. So along these 1-mile looped routes, there were 3 memory markers. And the application would their GPS prompt, so they would sort of buzz and give an alert about 20 feet away, and then participants are supposed to stop, and they have up to 3 minutes to look at the image and read the prompts, and then they continue to walk and talk as they continue the route. And so this is a really lighthearted prompt that asks, have you ever been in any plays, and what role did theater in Portland's Black community play? So we have really culturally celebratory images that draws upon our strengths, but we also dive into more serious topics. We look at the challenges of women in the mother's generation, and we certainly don't shy away from the most serious topics because that would truly be an insult to our participants' intelligence. And so we also look at, like for example, the murder by police of this teen Ricky Johnson in 1975 and ask, what do they think about Black Lives Matter? But this was done in 2016. And so hearing this narrative now, or having people respond to this prompt now, is in itself an archive, because we can see sort of how the narrative is changing, or the perception is changing among older Black adults in light of these current events. So our average participant was a 66-year-old woman who was employed and currently living in the gentrifying neighborhoods and had lived there for over 21 years. 18 of our 21 participants remained, so we had a very high retention rate. And we were really looking for signals of efficacy if walking and talking for 6 months had an effect on brain health and other health outcomes. And we had positive results in almost all of our areas of measurement. We had improved blood pressure, and more people were reporting that they were in excellent or very good health. More people were feeling more days feeling calm and peaceful, and less days feeling downhearted and blue. And in terms of cognitive assessment, half of our participants, so 9 of the 18, had improved cognitive assessment scores after walking the 6 months. And if we look at those who had mild cognitive impairment, it was 76% who had either maintained, which is the row under the equal sign there, or improved their cognitive scores under the plus sign there. And overall, those with mild cognitive impairment really improved the most. They had the greatest benefit, with a statistically significant average change in score of 3.6 points on the Montreal Cognitive Assessment compared to those who were cognitively healthy. And of course, people with more memory loss had more memory to improve. So that's also something to factor in. We looked at people's mood. We asked, what was your mood right after group walks? And that improved from month 1 to month 6, where 94% said that they were in a better mood right after walks. And we asked, how was your mood since group walks began? And 100% of people reported that their mood was better since group walks began. We also asked people to rank motivational aspects, or you can think of it as the aspects that were enjoyable. And we found that rankings of extremely motivating or very motivating were 3 times more likely than rankings of somewhat motivating or not a motivating factor for me. And motivation remained consistently high from month 1 to month 6. So motivational factors of extremely or very scored 98 in month 1 and month 6 to show that motivation remained throughout. People didn't get tired of the intervention. And for those aspects that were ranked lower, that had to do with technology. Because of our technology failures, we were still developing the application. But the good news is that can be changed. We're improving the technology. In fact, we have a career development award to improve the walking application and to start developing cultural materials for African Americans in Oakland. So we're super excited about developing the SHARP study there. And so I just want to wind down here with the SHARP study and share a couple of really meaningful quotes that give voice to how people experienced joy through this intervention. And so we had focus groups, and in discussions, these are some of the quotes that came out. And this person says, now it's like you don't got time for the TV, you got to get somewhere, and then you've got to be there on time, and you've got to participate, and you have to do the walk. And after you do the walk, it's been rewarding to know that other people my age are active. This person says the remembrance is so important, and I think that pushes back the Alzheimer's when people forget. Well, they have the name right on the tip of their tongue, and somebody says, well, that's such and such. Oh, and then that kicks in a whole bunch of other memories. And I think that's insightful. That's good. Just walking together brings all those memories back, and names that you have forgotten, hadn't heard for 15 or 20 years or longer. It brings back, and that's joyful. Here, they describe it as a happy learning experience, that they're more connected to the community than they ever had been before. So I'm just going to touch very quickly on the community deliverables. So we take the narratives that we're collecting through walking, and we have these community learning sessions in person where we have these snippets of narrative and relate them to healthy behaviors people can do now. So this is an enjoyable way to make health information more relatable, more memorable, and maybe more likely to share. My mentor, Dr. Barnes, was also a speaker at one of our, what we call talk and tastes. And we also do these Motown groove sessions where 1 or 2 minutes, we have a dancer lead these movements. And then we ask people to turn their chairs into groups of 3 for 10 minutes. And we look at a historical image and they have this chance to socially engage and reminisce together. And finally, we are making a culturally celebratory brain health resource where we are not only putting the oral history narratives, the oral digital archive, but we are also, again, translating the narratives and pairing that, or I'm sorry, we're pairing the narratives collected from walks and pairing that with health information in a way that is culturally engaging, uplifting, and hopeful. And so I just want to leave us with sort of my thinking as I was developing what is this is a brand new talk for me. And I'm not going to go through all of this, and I'm hoping to publish this, but this is sort of how I've conceptualized this, that we have this lens that we need to start with in order to develop a sense of belonging in aging research that will foster joy. We have to be historically conscious. We have to be consciously cultivating belonging as a foundation of joy. We need to engage frameworks that focus on that us, we dynamic, and that is asset-based. And then our delivery has to be culturally celebratory, to really draw upon our cultural strengths, our symbols, those things that reinforce our community and our culture and empower us as individuals and as community. And then on the right side, as we're moving from conceptualizing joy in research to action and engagement, I've just listed here, the various modalities that we've talked about, all the variations, and then the outcomes that is a strong sense of belonging in research is imperative for a joyful experience, and joyful experiences motivate sustained engagement for potentially better health outcomes. So finally, I'm not going to go through all of these questions, but, and as you think about this, you may have other better questions to ask yourself, but to consciously think about how are you talking about Black Americans and dementia? Are you using language that sparks hope or fear? Is joy in your center's lexicon? And if it's not, then can you consider it a value of your center? Do you measure enjoyment? Do you measure joy? Are you creating a partnership with participants to understand what joy in research might look like for them? So this was my last slide. We're running out of time. I must thank our generous funders, Alzheimer's Association, the NIA and the CDC and others, my mentors and all of the individuals who helped develop the SHARP study. And I must give a big thanks to the Diversity Leadership Program of the American Academy of Neurology, because throughout this last year, they were just a huge support to me during all of these difficult times. So this is my contact information, and I will leave you with that. Again, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Raina, thank you so very much. So we already have a number of comments about how this presentation was inspiring, colorful, wonderful, and yes, joyful. So you certainly succeeded in providing all of us with this message. One operational question is, are you on social media, or more specifically your work on social media, so that people are able to follow how you are progressing?
Yeah, I'm working on that. I am trying to be more active on social media. And as for our culturally celebratory website, we're close to launching it. And I didn't mention that that was actually in partnership with older Black adults who were testing each phase of the website. So I'm hoping to have a presence online, the SHARP study, through that website soon. Great.
So you just have very many positive comments. I'm interested, you certainly in your title, and certainly infused throughout your presentation, and then your last slide for a take-home point is underscores joy. But I also was impressed at how much belonging seems to be critical in all of this. And I know you went through this, but if you might just help summarize your ideas about how the sense of belonging can be strengthened in people who participate in Alzheimer research.
Yeah, well, I think that all of us feel a sense of belonging when we've been part of the process from the beginning, when we've seen a demonstrable dedication from the research institutions that we're working with, that they've long been in the community, that they have a plan for sustaining their engagement after the intervention ends. And I think all of that is part of belonging. I mean, just think about how you feel when you feel like you belong. When you feel like you belong, you're relaxed, you know, you can enjoy yourself and your authentic self can come through, which then, you know, makes you more open to experiencing joy. And then when you're somewhere where where you're maybe suspicious of how they're going to use your data, or is this really for us, you don't feel comfortable, you feel self-conscious, and you feel like you sort of have to watch your back and really try and understand what is it that they really want. So I think being very transparent about what our research goals are and how we plan to stay visible in the community, interwoven with the community, but also that it's no surprise to what our research agenda is, because that was cultivated step by step with the communities that we're serving.
Okay, great, thank you. I know we're close to the end, but here's a specific question for you, and it has to do with the SHARP study and what your plans are for this. Is it going to continue, and will you expand it?
Yes, I certainly hope so. We are developing a sample of 10 walks with UC Davis and my mentor, David Johnson, there, and the African American Museum and Library at Oakland. They have an extensive collection. So we'll be interviewing community stakeholders about what are the points of significance to the Black community in Oakland. And then eventually the next stage is to apply for more money to do a bigger randomized, or to do a bigger clinical trial. And we would like to engage Chicago communities looking to apply to an R01, as well as communities in Oakland, and to continue with communities in Portland. We're also examining now how it affects sleep. So we're increasing our digital biomarkers. We're using a sleep sensor, and we're using an actigraph watch. And I'm really excited about not only getting more oral history archives for these communities, but seeing how different communities respond to conversationally reminiscing about history in neighborhoods that are gentrifying and essentially erasing the Black presence and Black history in those communities.
Terrific. Thanks very much. And I'm sure your applications for greater funding will be favorably reviewed and you'll get approved. And we look forward to following your work as time goes on. So thanks again for joining us. And if there are a number of other questions that come up, Jennifer Phillips, I'm sure, can collate them and send them to you to address it individually. But thank you so much. Great to see you again, and best wishes. So take care.
Thank you very much.